Welcome to the National Archives Know Your Records program. My name's Andrea Bassing-Matney, and we are broadcasting live from the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, for those of you who are on site to participate in the talk today, if you have any questions, we ask that you hold them until the very end of the program. And so our YouTube audience can hear you. We ask that you use the microphones in the aisle. Or maybe our presenter can repeat the question for you. For those of you who are watching online, welcome. And you can also ask questions. You'll need to log in to YouTube and type your questions into the chat feature. And then you'll hear me reading the questions to the presenter. And we'll again do that at the end of the presentation. Also on this YouTube webpage, you'll find a link to the presentation slides. You can download those to your heart's content. And we also have live captioning. So I hope you'll find those under the description section of the video. So today's program is entitled The Winding Journey of Bill Genaust Flag-Raising Footage. So our presenter today is Chris Kovac. She became the supervisor of Motion Picture Preservation Lab in 2005. And let me bring up her biography. Since coming to the National Archives, she has implemented motion picture digitization restoration to complement photochemical preservation of the National Archives collection. She holds degrees from Oberlin College, Nottingham Trent University, and the L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our presenter, Chris Kovac.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. I also wanted to mention that this presentation was also previously given at the Marine Corps Museum's Iwo Jima Symposium, which was to commemorate the 72nd anniversary of the flag raising this past February. NARA is home to the second largest motion picture, audio, and video collection in the U.S. To date, we have full intellectual physical control over 480,000 reels of film, 242,000 audio recordings, and 113,000 video recordings. The presidential libraries, which are also under NARA's purview, have approximately 91,000 dynamic media records scattered between them. In the wings across the presidential libraries and our own facilities are an additional 200,000 plus items in the backlog waiting to be formally accessioned into various collections. And just to give you an idea of the size and scope of NARA's overall collection, the motion picture, audio, and video materials make up 0.06% of all records at NARA. One of our larger collections and one that is frequently utilized are the 17,000 reels of motion picture film in the Marine Corps holdings. The collection is predominantly unedited and covers the full spectrum of Marine Corps activities at home and abroad. There are approximately 12,000 reels of color 16mm film spanning World War II through the 1980s and 4,500 reels of black and white and color 35mm, mainly of footage from World War II and the Korean War era. A smaller percentage of material is made up of edited training and documentary films, and far more training and documentary films of Marine Corps content is held within U.S. Navy record groups, including 428 NPC. One of NARA's other prominent facilities is the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis, where military and pre-1973 civilian personnel files are housed, including that of combat cameraman William Homer Genaust. Genaust's file is among those considered within the lexicon of persons of exceptional prominence, and his file was made available digitally in 2014. The file provides details and summaries of Genaust's military service, pension documents, medical records, and contains correspondence with family members. Included in the correspondence is this letter from Jesse Genaust to FDR, written while Bill Genaust was recovering after being shot in the thigh by a sniper on July 9th, 1944. It reads, "Dear Mr. Roosevelt, I have a problem. You alone can help me. I have a son in the Pacific who is past 38 years old and in the service nearly 2 years. I would like to have him home. I am a widow and I have been since 1920. It was a hard struggle for me to raise and educate my 2 sons. My eldest son has been transferred to Seattle, and that leaves me alone, and I am not well. Billy was wounded in action on Saipan the day the island was rescued. Now he is in a hospital. I feel he has done his part in this war, and I really need him. Dear Mr. Roosevelt, if you would have him sent home, you would make me the happiest mother in all the world. God bless and keep you. P.S. Will you please keep this confidentially?" Also in the file is Bill Genaust's enlistment photo. He was known around the division as the old man, having enlisted at the ancient age of 36. The Motion Picture Preservation Lab at NARA is responsible for identifying film copies of titles for permanent retention of incoming accessions, evaluating physical condition of the overall collection, hands-on preservation of the records, and digital conversion of film for access, restoration, and preservation. Selection of appropriate preservation actions, including reformatting, is a collaborative process between the archival branch and the preservation lab staff. Lab staff treats and preserves over 3,000 reels of film each year. The lab is one of less than a dozen fully operational film labs left in the U.S., and NARA is committed to film preservation for as long as film stock and equipment are available. In addition to photochemical preservation, the lab digitizes approximately 650 reels a year for direct access to the public and is capable of scanning in footage at HD, 2K, and 4K resolution. The mission of the Motion Picture Preservation Lab is to identify and preserve the most original copy that arrives at the archives. This can range from the camera original to a faded, scratched print shown in high school classrooms, or a copy that's been printed time and time again over several generations. Our goal is to preserve and digitize our collections in a historically accurate manner, which requires that all of our staff be familiar with film stock types and processes across the last century, to ensure that our preservation masters and digital copies accurately reflect the time period in which they were shot. This can range from nitrate film shot in the teens to Technicolor prints, or as in the case of Bill Genaust flag raising footage, 16mm Kodachrome. As part of this process, for films of significant interest and value, additional time and research is put forth by staff to help contextualize the film. Much of this work is done when records are preserved or digitized for anniversaries, events, or when records of interest are brought into the collection. For the 75th anniversary events of World War II, NARA has been called upon to work on a variety of titles and footage from the war. In early summer of 2016, NARA was contacted by the Smithsonian Channel and Lucky 8 Television to provide 4K scans of the Genaust flag-raising footage for the production The Unknown Flag Raiser of Iwo Jima. And this is where the mystery of Genaust's original footage began for NARA. Before diving into the particulars of the flag-raising footage, I'd like to provide some additional context. Combat cameramen shooting 16mm film during World War II generally carried a 6-pound Bell & Howell 70DA Filmo camera and 16mm Kodachrome film in lengths of about 100 feet, which is the equivalent to just over 2 minutes of runtime. Combat cameramen were not fully armed. They were often issued only a revolver rather than rifles, as the film equipment was heavy and filming and changing out rolls was a primary focus. The film that had been shot in the field was then sent to a lab. For still photography, it went to Guam. Aerial and reconnaissance film went to Kodak Waikiki in Hawaii for the Pacific Front, and motion picture film went to the Navy Photographic Lab in Anacostia, Maryland. Once at the lab, the reels were developed, and the 100-foot reels were loosely assembled into longer rolls of about 400 feet, or 11 minutes. And it was generally based upon dates on the slates that were filmed as part of the roll. The film was then reviewed and possibly recut for purposes of intelligence gathering, training, and to document historic events. This information is very important in the context of the Genaust footage, as the flag raising scenes were spliced together at the Navy Photographic Lab out of order. The first 35 seconds are of the second flag raising, and the last 19 seconds are of the first flag raising. The lab personnel in 1945 would have had no way to know what order the footage occurred in actuality. The archival unit sent 12 copies of the footage to the lab with a request to definitively identify the original and provide scans for the Smithsonian Channel production. Upon full inspection and analysis, it was apparent that NARA lacked the original reversal film stock that was in Bill Genaust's camera on Iwo Jima, February 23, 1945. The image here is one example of the many paths that content can take from origination to completion, and it's not necessarily the exact workflow that it would have occurred for the Genaust film. Film is complex in that multiple iterations are often required to create a whole production. A single title can be assembled from a few elements, such as a reel of film with only the image on it and a reel of film with only the soundtrack on it, that are then combined onto another complete reel. In some cases, anywhere from 20 pieces of film to hundreds are used to make up one production. In the case of the Genaust film, given the high interest in the content in the spring of 1945, it was reprinted multiple times and for multiple purposes. Additional 16mm copies and 35mm blow-ups were made then and over the course of several years thereafter. In fact, NARA's copies are a mix of 16mm and 35mm and are located within 3 collections: film of Marine Corps activities, unedited motion picture films, and from the Department of the Navy, moving images related to military activities. Many of the film collections at NARA are accompanied by shot list cards that include a history of how many times the film was copied. Item number 127R3224 within the Film of Marine Corps Activities collection was thought to be the original Genaust flag-raising footage segment. Was thought to be the original Genaust flag-raising footage segment that had been excerpted out of item number 127R2438. However, the index card for 127R3224 has a note from December of 1968 stating, "We do not have any of this. We only have 35mm number 4077 interneg blowups." And an interneg refers to an intermediate negative copied from an original or another source. All 3 copies of the 127R3224 film in NARA's custody were created sometime after 1958 with very poor color reproduction. The film record listed on the reverse of the index card shows that the film was copied on 7 different occasions between 1968 and 1980. Item number 127G4077 from the unedited motion picture films collection wasn't considered within the framework of this project, as it consisted of 35mm blow-ups that were also known to be poor reproductions from the 16mm copies. The next item number to be evaluated was 127R2438, the reel that the flag-raising footage had been excerpted from. The index card for this item notes that a new master copy was made in May of 1972 and refers back to item number 127R3224, stating, "For flag raising scene, see index number 3224. There is no 16mm flag raising scene left, all missing. We have 35mm blow up interneg and interpos." And an interpositive refers to an intermediate negative with a positive image. All 3 copies of the film in NARA's custody with this item number were created after 1971 and did not contain any of the flag raising footage. Finally, 6 reels for item number 428 NPC 2924 from the Department of the Navy were evaluated and the footage was complete. It contained all of the material from 127R2438 as well as the flag raising footage from 127R3224, but none of the 6 copies were the original. The oldest copy, and in the best condition, was printed around 1951, while the other 5 copies were printed sometime between 1964 and 2004. The 1951 Kodachrome copy is NARA's most original source. In an effort to try to identify the path that the film may have taken after leaving Iwo Jima, additional research was undertaken to see what could be uncovered. The search led to Norm Hatch, that handsome gentleman there, who is a much revered Marine Corps combat cameraman who was in charge of the 5th Division photo section on Iwo Jima and has proved to be an invaluable resource for historians and researchers over the past 7 decades. Sadly, Mr. Hatch passed away on April 22nd, but he left behind a legacy for historians and future combat cameramen to emulate. The first clue came in an article from the Washington Post on February 23, 2013, in which Hatch reported that he had ordered Staff Sergeant Bill Genaust and Private First Class Bob Campbell to film the Marines heading up Mount Suribachi with the second flag. About 2 weeks later, he returned to the States to vouch for the authenticity of Rosenthal's photograph and also told a hopefully white lie that Genaust's footage could stand in place for Rosenthal's photograph if the Associated Press was going to charge the Marines $1 per use to use the image for recruiting or other purposes. As there are 24 images per second of film, Hatch was gambling that one of those frames could stand in for the photograph. At that point, Hatch had no idea whether or not Genaust's footage was good or not. To verify these details, Mr. Hatch's orders from his time on Iwo Jima, as well as personal correspondence, were reviewed. Division photographic officers would rotate from where they were stationed, D to A +7, D +14, D +21, etc., to deliver the film that had been shot each week to be developed from the time of landing at the Naval Photographic Lab in Anacostia. First Lieutenant Herb Schlossberg, photo officer for the 4th Marine Division, had taken the Genaust film on D +8 to the Naval Photographic Lab to be developed, and then he took the original, or possibly copies, to the Naval Photographic Services Depot in Hollywood. As the head of the 5th Division Photographic Section, Hatch received the D +14 order to take the next batch of material off of Iwo Jima on March 8th, which was D +18. By March 8th, Genaust had been dead for 4 days, and Hatch knew that the film brought back by Schlossberg contained the flag raising. At this point, Rosenthal's photograph had already been widely circulated. Hatch flew out on March 13th, making brief stops along the way at Pearl Harbor and in San Francisco. Having been the photographic officer to order the cameraman up Mount Suribachi, he was then ordered to fly to Washington, D.C., where he arrived on March 17th to meet with General Vandegrift and executives from the Associated Press and Time Life to vouch for the authenticity of Rosenthal's photograph and the Genaust footage. From D.C., he was sent to the NPS depot in Hollywood, where he arrived on March 27th. While at the Naval Photographic Services in Hollywood, he reviewed the footage that had been shot by Genaust. At this point, it is unclear if the footage was the camera original brought back by Schlossberg or copies. From Hollywood, Hatch traveled back to the Navy Photographic Lab in Anacostia to craft the public release details of the footage. He left Washington, D.C. again on April 30th and reported to Navy Photographic Services once again to work on the material for To the Shores of Iwo Jima, which was co-produced by the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Warner Brothers, and United Artists, and was released on June 7, 1945. The footage was also used in black and white newsreels, such as Universal News for release to the public, and in United newsreels, which were shown only to armed forces personnel. Black and white footage was included as part of the 7th War Loan Drive effort, where the flag raisers toured the country to encourage further financial contributions for the ongoing war. However, the first time Americans saw the flag-raising footage in color was in To the Shores of Iwo Jima. While Bill Genaust received several medals and ribbons, he was not honored as the photographer who captured the flag-raising on film until the 1980s, and his widow, Adelaide, was unaware that he'd shot the footage until months after she'd seen it in movie theaters. Norm Hatch received a Bronze Star Medal for all of his actions on Iwo Jima, and he spent much of the rest of his life educating others about the battle for Iwo Jima, including trying to highlight Genaust's contribution to the national narrative. In 1995, a plaque was put up next to the memorial shrine atop Mount Suribachi, honoring Genaust's role, and each year, the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation gives the Sergeant William Genaust Award for a distinguished documentary and short subject dealing creatively with U.S. Marine Corps heritage or Marine Corps life. In circumstances such as this, the staff at NARA make every effort to bring the most historically significant asset we have to the public. For the Smithsonian documentary, the Kodachrome copy from 1951 was scanned in at 4K resolution. The entire reel has also been uploaded to our YouTube channel, and we have digitized and uploaded the United Newsreel material as well. NARA has also provided material for the Academy Film Archive's restoration of To the Shores of Iwo Jima as part of their preservation efforts for the film, which was nominated for an Academy Award in 1945. Our best material is also available online, and once the Academy has finished their restoration, it will also be released to the public. The life of a film, and often its contributors, particularly in relation to combat, taken out of context, lives a circuitous existence. Despite having more information about where the original film went and where it may have gone, the whereabouts of the original camera footage is still a mystery. Film is both robust and fragile. It has the capacity to outlive the memory of the images it captures, but repeated handling and copying and poor storage environments can make it unusable or unsalvageable. The original Genaust film may be lost entirely. It may still be in another repository, or it may be hidden in one of the many locations it traveled to in the course of Hatch's missions. Wherever the original may be, NARA will continue to remain faithful to the film in its custody in perpetuity. As an example of exactly what Genaust had shot that day, I actually have a clip to show to you of all of the scenes he shot that day. I will warn you in advance that there are some images that may be disturbing. There are also some that are very sweet. But if you could go ahead and roll the clip, that would be great. That's the speedy version. I'm hoping that perhaps we can go back and have it play at the correct speed, but if not, what you saw was just the, well, this is the first flag raising, which was actually second in sequence. And this is the other stuff that was going on that day. So there was still bitter fighting occurring. And unfortunately, those are, they're recovering the dead. Those are actually dead Japanese. But then they have pets. Nothing like a little hardtack to share. Where he found a cat, I have no idea. But it's kind of interesting because we think of the flag raising as this, sort of singular, iconic moment in time. But I wanted to share this footage to show you that it was just one of the many things that happened during this day. And one of the other things that I did not mention is that the footage may also have been sent back to Hollywood at a certain point for the Sands of Iwo Jima production, which was made with John Wayne, I believe, about a year later. And they may have used, I know that they used quite a bit of the footage to model the scenes in the film after the actual events. So I'm happy to open it up to questions at this point, if anyone has any.
Thank you, Chris. So if you have questions, if you're here in the audience with us, if you would be so kind to either make your way up to a microphone, or if Chris could repeat your question. At this time, I don't have any questions from our online audience. While people are contemplating questions for you, you mentioned that there's many more films available. Can someone find on the National Archives catalog, can you do a search by film, just under that category, films?
Yes, there is if you go to the advanced search function, you can actually choose from a drop-down. There's a spot to select for moving images, and you can put in queries for, if you're specifically looking for this item, you can put queries in under Bill Genaust's name. You can also look up flag raising or Iwo Jima flag raising. It would probably also bring up some of the other records that I mentioned about various activities on Iwo Jima as well as to the shores of Iwo Jima.
Thank you. I do not have any questions from our online audience. I invite anybody here. Do you have questions for a presenter, Chris Kovac? No, is there any other things you'd like to mention before we end your program?
No, not at this time. So thanks again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to mention that this was a broadcast on YouTube, so it will remain online if you want to go back and review it, and you can download the presentation slides. And also, at this very moment in time, we're doing a survey for the Know Your Records program, so I would love to have your feedback on future programming. You could direct what we do in the future. So that is available on the Know Your Records webpage, and it's also on the YouTube webpage for this particular presentation. Thank you for coming, and I look forward to seeing you again. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you.